Good afternoon and welcome to Dingle Distillery. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Coull and I'm the master distiller here at Dingle. Today I want to take you through a deconstruction of the latest release from the distillery, which is Batch 5 Single Malt. You can just see the bottle here on the edge of the screen. I'll take you through that in a few moments, but I think I probably need to answer the question that many people ask is what's a Scotsman doing in Dingle? Well, after 25 years of making whisky in Scotland, 11 years with William Grant's at Glenfiddich and 14 years at Glenmurray, I was attracted to Dingle because of the position it's in, not only geographically but also the position that the distillery is in. It's now 7 years old and it's certainly reaching a very exciting time for the distillery as the whisky matures. Now, the distillery has built its foundations on whisky, but also on gin and vodka. The gin and vodka production has been very, very useful for the distillery to create cash flow and also to get the name out there as a quality spirits producer. So it's nice now to see the whisky coming to fore. They'll have to wait a few years to come of age, but it's certainly coming to the fore now. So I'd like to take you through the latest release and probably give you a little bit of background on how a release is pulled together. You know, I joined Dingle last October, and it was probably one of the first things I worked on was the release, which has now been bottled this month, which is March. So roughly 6 months later on, we're at a point where the whole thing has come to completion. So in my first 2 months with the distillery, I focused on the stock profile and looking at the casks we have, and there's certainly a wonderful selection of casks in the warehouse, and it was a pleasure to run through them and just see what there is. We have a high percentage of sherry casks, Pedro Jimenez, Oloroso, but also there are other casks in there as well, Bourbon obviously, but also Madeira as well. So it was a pleasure to work through it, but obviously I had to come to some decision, and it was great to bring together a few different cask types for Batch 5, because the distillery is still relatively young. It's 7 years old now, seven and a half years old. So the whisky is young, and it does benefit to be able to bring together several different cask types because they all help each other in the final product. Now, as I say, this is Batch 5. There's been 4 previous releases, Batch 1 to 4, and on the pot still side, because the distillery makes pot still as well, there have now been 3 releases on that side of things. So the number of releases are increasing, and hopefully there'll be many more to come. So back to Batch 5, it's a release of 36,500 bottles, and the majority of those bottles are released at a strength of 46.5%, which is a nice strength to enjoy. You know, the whisky, it gives it enough bite, enough character, enough taste. It allows you to add a little bit of water if you so wish, but it helps to take the sharp edge off what it would be at cask strength. So the majority is bottled at 46.5% and non-chill filtered. Now, Batch 5 consists of 3 different cask types. It's a lovely mix of ex-bourbon cask, which is I've got in front of me here. I should say, pause the video now and run away and pour yourself a whisky and join me, because I'm about to drink these. If you don't like to watch somebody drink on their own, then please join me. So I've got the ex-bourbon cask component. We also have a Pedro Jimenez sweet sherry component, and the third component is Madeira, which is quite a rare cask to get hold of these days for maturing whisky. So 3 components making up what is Batch 5, which is the glass here on my right. So, as I said before, I think the 3 cask types do help one another. They bring something to the party. Ex-bourbon is a lovely, straightforward cask. You always know what you'll get with an ex-bourbon cask, and this one is a particularly good example. Ex-bourbon, generally light in colour, which is very, very normal. What you get from a bourbon cask is vanilla, basically. Vanilla in different forms. So that can be in terms of honey or honeycomb, as the vanilla ice cream. Depends what your tastes are and what you like, but the vanilla definitely comes through. And you also get a spicy kick from the bourbon cask as well. And it's but lovely balanced nose, creamy vanilla, very strong. Maybe even a hint of coconut coming through on there with the bourbon. And then I'm going to taste this. These samples have all been reduced to 46.5, so they're the same strength as the final component. It's a bit easier to assess them and understand their unique flavours. So lovely, creamy, spicy, nice balance, and the finish as well. The finish, which is the last bit you taste when you drink a whiskey. The finish is relatively long for what is still relatively young whiskey, and it just disappears off into the distance in your mouth, and it's a lovely end to the whiskey. So the bourbon gives that aspect. Moving on to the PX and Madeira, much more heavy character. They do mature whiskies quicker, so you do get an instant flavour from the cask, a more dynamic flavour early on, and they do definitely bring their own character to the final whiskey. Pedro Jimenez is a sweet sherry, so it's going to bring those lovely sweet wine characters to it, raisins, Christmas cake. Also brings a bit of viscosity to it as well, a bit of cloyingness, a bit of mouthfeel, which helps hold the whiskey together and make it a more rounded experience. Slightly darker than the bourbon as well, but on the nose, yeah, much heavier. You get raisins, you get some dried raisins, a little bit maybe sort of darker fruits, dark chocolate flavours, nose. And taste wise, again, a sweetness, obviously a spice. Spice is mainly coming from the new spirit aspect, but that lovely raisiny texture is coming through, and it's a lovely mouthfeel to it as well. Just clings to the mouth and allows the taste to linger, and allow the taste buds to get the best from it. But lovely whiskies, lovely individual whiskies, but when combined, they bring something to the end product. The third component is the Madeira. The Madeira is a very rare cask to get. I was delighted when I went into the warehouse and looked at the stock profile and saw some Madeira casks. I've used them previously, and they bring a unique nutty dryness, there's a coffee intensity there as well. They just bring something different to the whiskey that a PX sherry or an Oloroso sherry, for example, can't bring. Probably most similar to an Oloroso if you want to compare and contrast with something that you may have tasted before. But Madeira, very hard to get. Unfortunately, we don't drink bottles and bottles of Madeira, and maybe we need to step up our consumption of these liquids so that I can use more casks in the future. But certainly it was a joy to behold. This is the first time Madeira is appearing in one of the batches, in Dingle batches, single malt. So it was nice to bring it to the batches as a first as well. On the nose, again, you get this nuttiness. It's nutty caramel, which is lovely, and it works well when you certainly match that with the sort of vanilla toffee flavours from the bourbon. You can see how these two match together. It also has wine character as well, so you do get a nice match with the Pedro Jimenez. it's lovely, but it's dry, you know. On its own, give it maybe a few more years, then on its own it will be the absolute bee's knees of a whiskey. But the great aspect of it, using it at this age, is that you can pick and choose the flavours. You can then marry the flavours from the other casks to plug the gaps and plug the holes in the flavour profile. So it is nice to combine the three, and basically that's obviously what I've done for batch 5. So this final glass here is batch 5, the final result, and I was pleasantly surprised when I put it together, and it's one of the first, or one of the few whiskies that I feel you can taste the individual casks at different stages in the tasting or the drinking experience. So the bourbon cask, I feel, comes through early on in the nose, and then when you go to drink the whiskey or put it in your mouth and on your palate, then the PX and the Madeira come through, the wine, the nuttiness, the dryness, the lovely mouthfeel as well. And then towards the end, when the whiskey's disappearing and you've swallowed the whiskey, then the bourbon cask comes back through and you get this lovely creamy spiciness just to finish off the drinking experience. So it's, for me, it's a lovely combination. And definitely, you know, the batch 5, the final batch 5 composition is, there's synergy there of the three casks. You do get more than the individuals can deliver on their own. When the three come together, lovely layers of flavour, lovely layers of character, and just a very nice drinking experience. Again, back to the strength, 46.5 is a cracking strength to drink whiskey at. Gives it enough bite, but takes the edge off the very high alcohol content which you can get with younger whiskies. So it's much better to enjoy that strength, and I'm going to have another one. So batch 5 now, do my sales pitch, is currently available. As I said, we're 36,500 bottles, so it's not, you know, not a massive batch size in any terms. That this will probably be our only whisky launch this year, single malt whisky launch. We'll have another pot still launch later in the year, which again is smaller volumes, given that we don't produce as much pot still as single malts. So if you'd like to try it, if you haven't tried it already, please do. I hope you enjoy it, and I would love to hear your feedback on it. As I said, it's wonderful to be able to construct whiskies with the cask portfolio that we have in the distillery. As I say, we fill quite a high percentage of sherry casks and other casks, rum. We've even got champagne casks lurking about as well. So there is a great selection to choose from, and hopefully, I'll bring some of those to you in the future. Cheers. I would also like to bring a Q&A session into the video as well, because we put out some feelers on social media and asked people to put questions to me. Always an interesting thing to do, and you do get some interesting ones. Some some ones that I won't reply to because I just won't. Maybe not safe to do so. Those that ask those questions do know who they are. I won't name the names, but Bill Linane, you know who you are. I'm not answering your questions. Anyway, but I do have a pile of them here, so I will crack through them. Apologies if I don't cover everybody's question, but I will try my best to get through them. There's quite a few questions on product distribution. I am quite happy to wash my hands of that, because I'll make the whiskey and construct it, but thankfully I don't have to sell it or market it. But I will get back to those individual questions on distribution. It is tricky. I always say it's very easy to make whiskey. It is harder to get it to market. So many hurdles to jump over, and you know, Dingle we're not the biggest in terms of whiskey manufacture and distribution. So please bear with us. It will get to market very soon, hopefully. I had one non-whiskey question as well from two people that I know quite well, or very well. They're asking about oat cakes and butteries. Now, butteries are a northeast Scotland delicacy, which, as you can see, looking at me, I live on them. They're very high in calorific value, and I do love them. I do miss them, but we had friends over in January who brought me about 3 dozen, and they went into the freezer. I think I've got 2 left. So boys, don't worry. I'm keeping my figure up. I've found plenty other things in Ireland to keep the weight on. You know, the bread here is lovely. The bacon is better than Scottish bacon, and the butter is just to die for. So don't worry about me. I will not fade away very soon. Alistair asked me what aspects of the job surprised me, and how did I overcome them. Now, I suppose it didn't surprise me because I knew where the distillery was, but the most interesting aspect has been working with a distillery that is still maturing and evolving every day and every year. So that has been for me the biggest interest and the biggest challenge as well, because you know, having worked at Glenfiddich and Glenmurray, both very well established distilleries, and they kind of know where they're going. You're steering a ship, but whereas at Dingle we have a bit of direction, but the next 5-10 years are an open book and very interesting times. So it's been a challenge to the older brain to get in gear with a distillery that's on the move, basically. So, but thanks for that question. It's a good one. We always get a few questions on the technical side, and Jack asks about esters and congeners in fermentation and distillation. Now, please, if this is beyond your level of interest, then do not switch off. But esters are very important. They are the flavour aspect of whiskey, or one of the biggest flavour aspects. Now, I'm standing. If you look, you can't look down there. If you did, it's a washback, a wooden washback, and that's where many of the esters are formed. And at Dingle, we give every chance. We give a decent long fermentation, 72 hours. So length of fermentation is very important for ester formation. And congeners, there are good congeners or there are bad congeners, basically flavour aspects in your whiskey, your spirit that you do or do not want. Now, it's the stills behind that will either take those congeners out or keep them in as you distill. And the great thing about Dingle is the distillation rate is very slow. We distill at 5 litres per minute, which is the slowest I've experienced in my time. And also, we don't increase the flow rate when we go on to feints or tails, as they're known. So it's a very gentle distillation. So that means you get lots of reflux, lots of contact with the copper, and lots of removal and separation of flavours, and hopefully the final spirit is much smoother because of that approach. So two aspects there, Jack. Hopefully that's enough detail for you. Again, on the spirit side of things, I was asked about spirit cuts and when they're taken. 3 distillations here. Intermediate cut is taken at 30%, and then the spirit still we cut at 78%, so quite high for that. So two spirit cuts there if you really want to know the numbers. Jeff asked me about peated spirit or peated whiskey. Yeah, well, I started making peated whiskey spirit at Glenfiddich, also at Balvenie and Glenmurray, and I've basically kept the tradition going, and I've made a little bit of peated single malt spirit here at Dingle. I'm not here to change in things and do anything very, very radical, but it'll be a nice addition to the range in a few years' time, where we did a week's worth of single malt production, and it'll be nice to see that come through, and hopefully it's just another angle of Dingle for you to try. So yes, I've ticked the peated box. Moving on to more maturation questions. Many questions about what kind of casks I like to use, what I'm planning to use. Well, as I said, Dingle has a great portfolio of bourbon casks, sherry casks, Madeira, some rum. So I am actively looking to introduce, a wider portfolio of casks. I've already filled some Australian wine casks, some Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. So that's already happened. We're getting some Fino sherry casks in as well, and hopefully, I'll add to that in the future, because as Dingle gets older, the whiskey gets older, then you'll see more expressions which are single cask variety only or single cask finishes, because the cask type will be able to stand up on its own. It will not need to combine with others. So you will see 100% PX or hopefully 100% Madeira as well. Looking to introduce wine casks, looking to introduce finishes as well, because it adds another twist, and it's always interesting to see how the spirit reacts. And the great thing is I can do that with single malt, but I can also do it with pot still as well. So I've got two things to play with, really. Another question on the batch releases: will they continue? They will continue for the short term, I would say, because, as I said, the whiskey is maturing with age. I would say, yeah, definitely we will have an age statement Dingle at some point. It would be great to see that come through, and then, Dingle being the first of the new Irish distilleries, it'd be great to see Dingle hit a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old and see a release at that age. So batches will continue, but I think we'll move towards more core product maybe, and having something that's available all year round with smaller limited releases on the side, so that people can try different things as well as have a mainstream product. So yep, that's that one. David's asking where will Irish whiskey be in 20 years? Well, I hope I'll be here in 20 years, but I'll certainly see most of that out, I would like to say. Irish whiskey in 20 years, interesting question. I think it's obviously there'll be a lot more mature Irish whiskey out there, a lot more choice, so I think it'll be much more similar to the Scotch whiskey market and what's available there. And I think because of that, you'll get people. There'll be less of a boundary between Irish and Scotch whiskey. They'll be much more similar, and people won't just drink one or the other. They'll merge between the two, and it'll be lovely to see some different Irish whiskies at much more mature ages. So it's interesting times ahead. I think as long as we maintain the quality, that's all we can do, and focus on making the best spirit we can and mature it as best we can as well in the best wood. Final question on that. I've got, always the one that's asked at the end of stage. What's your favourite whiskey? Well, I always cop out of this one because I never give a straight answer, and I honestly don't have a favourite whiskey. Whiskey's all about memories and where you drank it, who you drank it with, your first experience. So it's very much down to that. I'm not going to answer it, so sorry. And finally, final question was from Liam. Virtual tastings, are they any good? Well, I'll leave that to you to decide. I've had a couple of whiskies, a couple of sips today. I've enjoyed my side of it. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to me, especially if you've had a whiskey in hand. It would be much more preferable to see you in the flesh at the distillery and sharing a dram with you all, but that will come. You're certainly all very welcome to visit. So I raise my glass to anyone who has suffered to the end of this video and listened to me. If you enjoyed it, let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, then let somebody else know. I'll just finish with a I raise my glass of batch pie. Cheers.